Mud-caked work boots left prints across the polished marble lobby like an accusation no one had invited. Caleb Harlan walked through the front entrance of Whitfield Architectural Group carrying a thermos of cold coffee in one hand and a rolled tube of structural drawings in the other, completely unaware that in less than 40 minutes, the most powerful woman in the building would be standing in front of him with trembling hands asking him to please not leave. But that part comes later. Right now, at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October, Caleb was just a man trying to keep his life from falling apart one day at a time. He was 39 years old, though most people guessed mid-40s. Grief does that. It settles in around the eyes first, then works its way into the posture, the shoulders, the way a man holds his jaw when he thinks no one is watching. His wife Megan had died 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by December. The speed of it still didn't make sense to him. Some mornings he woke up reaching for her side of the bed before his brain caught up to his body. He had a son, Theo, 6 years old, with his mother's dark brown eyes and a gap-toothed grin that could make even the worst days feel survivable. Theo was the reason Caleb still set an alarm. The reason he still ironed shirts. The reason he packed lunches with the crusts cut off in careful triangles, because Megan had always done it that way and Caleb could not bring himself to stop. Every weekday morning followed the same rhythm. Up at 5:15. Coffee brewing while he laid out Theo's clothes. Breakfast together, usually cereal, sometimes scrambled eggs when Caleb had the energy. Teeth brushed, backpack checked, shoes tied. Theo sang to himself in the backseat on the drive to school. Little songs he made up about nothing, and Caleb listened to every word like it was the only music left in the world. After drop-off, the day belonged to work. Caleb was a structural engineer, not the kind who sat in glass offices drawing straight lines on computer screens. The kind who crawled under buildings, the kind who got called when foundations cracked, when load calculations didn't add up, when a contractor poured concrete over rebar that wasn't placed right and needed someone to figure out whether the whole thing had to come down. He was good at it. Quietly, stubbornly good at it. The kind of good that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. His truck reflected the work. A 2004 Chevy Silverado, dark green under the mud, with a dented tailgate and a passenger door that required a specific combination of lifting and pulling to open. The bed was loaded with equipment, surveying tools, a hard hat, a box of geological reports he hadn't filed yet. Theo's booster seat sat in the back of the cab, surrounded by juicebox wrappers and a stuffed dinosaur named Professor. The truck smelled like dirt, old coffee, and the faint sweetness of children's sunscreen. It was not the kind of vehicle that belonged in the private parking area of Whitfield Architectural Group's downtown headquarters. Caleb knew that. He also knew that the email had told him to use the main entrance and that the only available parking near the main entrance was the executive lot, so he pulled in, parked between a black Porsche Cayenne and a silver Mercedes S-Class, and told himself it would only be a couple of hours. He was wrong. Inside the building was everything his truck was not. Glass, steel, reclaimed wood accents, a reception desk that probably cost more than his annual property tax. The air smelled like something expensive and intentional, not a scent so much as a statement. Two women behind the desk glanced at him, then at each other, then back at him. He was wearing work pants with a faded knee stain, a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and a canvas jacket that had survived 3 years of crawling through construction sites. He had cleaned up as much as the morning allowed, but cleaned up for Caleb meant his boots weren't actively dripping. He gave his name, showed the email on his phone. One receptionist typed something, nodded, and directed him to the 11th floor. Conference room B. He thanked her and walked toward the elevators, aware of the looks that followed him like a quiet weather system. What Caleb did not see, because the elevator doors had already closed, was the woman who stepped out of a Blacktown car at exactly 8,053 and spotted his truck from 30 feet away. Sloan Whitfield had built her firm from a 2-person office above a dry cleaner into one of the most respected architectural design companies on the eastern seaboard. She was 46 years old, sharp-jawed, immaculately dressed in a charcoal blazer and heels that clicked against concrete with the precision of a metronome. Her reputation was built on 3 things: vision, control, and an absolute refusal to tolerate anything she considered beneath the standard she had set. That standard extended to everything. The work. The office. The parking lot. She stopped walking when she saw the Silverado. Mud on the tires, mud on the fender, a crack running diagonally across the windshield, something that might have been a coffee stain on the driver's side door. Between her Porsche and her CFO's Mercedes, it looked like someone had dragged it in as a joke. She didn't ask whose it was. She didn't check the visitor log. She pulled out her phone, called building security, and said 5 words that would cost her more than she could possibly calculate at that moment. Have that vehicle removed. Now. By 9:04, a tow truck was backing into the executive lot. Upstairs, Caleb stood alone in conference room B, looking out a floor-to-ceiling window at the city below. He could see the river from here, October light catching the surface in brief silver flashes. He set down his thermos, unrolled his drawings across the table, and waited. He had been brought in for a reason, and the reason was a disaster. 7 months ago, Whitfield Architectural had broken ground on the Crown Lakeshore Tower, a 38-story mixed-use high-rise on the city's waterfront. It was supposed to be the firm's signature achievement. The design was ambitious. The budget was $340 million. The client was a private equity consortium that did not tolerate delays and had zero sense of humor about cost overruns. 3 weeks ago, during a routine subsurface inspection, an independent geotechnical team discovered anomalies in the foundation. Deep ones. The kind that couldn't be explained by soil variability alone. Something was wrong with the load-bearing calculations. Possibly the pilings. Possibly the subgrade drainage design. Possibly both. The lead structural engineer who had designed the foundation system had already resigned under pressure, leaving behind incomplete documentation and a problem no one inside the firm fully understood. Construction was halted. The client consortium was furious. City inspectors were circling. Insurance adjusters were making phone calls, and every day the tower sat idle. The firm hemorrhaged roughly $185,000 in carrying costs, penalties, and lost revenue. Caleb had been contacted through a former colleague who knew his work. Quietly, unofficially, the kind of call that comes with the unspoken understanding that if he could fix it, there would be a real contract waiting. He had spent the past 2 weeks analyzing the geotechnical reports, reviewing the original structural drawings, and running his own calculations. He was almost certain he understood what had gone wrong. More importantly, he was almost certain he knew how to fix it without demolishing the foundation, which would save the firm somewhere between $40 and $60 million. He had not slept well in days, partly because of the work, partly because Theo had been having nightmares again, and Caleb could never fall back asleep after carrying him to the couch and holding him until the crying stopped. At 9:12, people began entering the conference room. Board members, project managers, legal counsel, expensive suits, expensive watches, expensive confidence. A few nodded at Caleb. Most did not. One man looked at his boots, said nothing, and chose a seat at the far end of the table. Sloane entered last. She moved through the room the way certain people move through any room, with the assumption that the space had been waiting for her. She sat at the head of the table, opened the leather portfolio, and scanned the room without greeting anyone specifically. She did not recognize Caleb. She had never seen him before. To her, he was simply another consultant in a long line of consultants the firm had been cycling through in increasing desperation. His appearance registered briefly, filed under "not our kind," and immediately dismissed. The meeting began with status updates, each one worse than the last. The city had scheduled a formal review hearing in 22 days. The client consortium's attorneys had sent a letter that used the phrase "material breach" 4 times. Insurance was threatening to reclassify the project's risk tier, which would increase premiums by an amount that made the CFO visibly uncomfortable to say out loud. Then it was Caleb's turn. He stood up without ceremony, unrolled his drawings over the ones already on the table, pulled out a worn notebook filled with calculations written in small, precise handwriting, and began to explain. He spoke the way he always spoke, slowly at first, then gaining momentum as the logic built on itself. No jargon for the sake of jargon, no performance. He identified 3 critical errors in the original pilings placement, showed exactly where the load transfer was failing, and explained why previous consultants had missed it. They had been looking at the structure from the top down. Caleb worked from the ground up. Literally, he had spent his career underneath things. He presented a remediation plan in 3 phases. Phase 1 addressed the immediate structural risk. Phase 2 corrected the drainage failure that was accelerating soil settlement. Phase 3 introduced a supplementary micropile system that could be installed without halting the existing foundation, meaning construction could resume within weeks instead of months. He had cost projections. He had timelines. He had cost projections. He had timelines. He had contingency plans for the contingency plans. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of mild interest. The kind of quiet that settles over a group of intelligent people who have just realized they are in the presence of someone who understands their problem better than they do. A board member named Philip Chen leaned forward. "How long have you been working on this?" "About 2 weeks on the specifics," Caleb said, "but I've been solving problems like this for 15 years. "And the micropile system," another executive asked, "that's been validated at this depth before." 3 times in my direct experience. I can send you the case documentation this afternoon. Questions kept coming. Caleb answered everyone, not with bravado, with the steady, certain calm of someone who had checked his own work because no one else was going to check it for him. Single parents develop that habit. You become your own safety net because there is no one standing behind you. Sloane had stopped writing in her portfolio about 4 minutes into Caleb's presentation. She was watching him now with the particular expression of someone performing rapid internal recalculation. This man was not what she had assumed. This man was not what he looked like. This man might be the only person in the room who actually knew what to do. Then came the moment that changed the texture of the entire day. Caleb paused, checked his phone. The school had sent a message: early dismissal due to a water main break. Theo needed to be picked up by 12:30 instead of 3:15. That gave him roughly 2.5 hours. "I'll need to leave by noon," he said simply. "My son's school is letting out early." A few people blinked. In this world, you did not announce your departure time during a critical strategy session. You stayed until you were released. But Caleb was not from this world. He was from the world where no one else was going to pick up his kid. "That's fine," Philip said. "Let's make sure we cover the implementation timeline before then." The discussion continued. Contract terms came up naturally. Scope of engagement, exclusivity, compensation. The numbers being discussed were not small. They were, in fact, large enough to fundamentally change Caleb's financial situation. Pay off the last of Megan's medical debt. Fix the truck properly. Maybe even stop checking his bank balance before filling up the gas tank. At 11:38, Caleb began packing his drawings. "I should head down early," he said. "I'm parked in the executive lot and I want to make sure I have time to get across town." Philip looked confused. "You drove here?" "My truck's out front." "Green Silverado." The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one had a temperature. Sloane's assistant, who had been quietly taking notes near the door, looked up. Then looked at Sloane. Then looked away quickly. A facilities manager who had been called in for part of the meeting cleared his throat. "Ah, there may be an issue with that." "What kind of issue?" Caleb asked. The facilities manager glanced at Sloane. Sloane did not move. Her face had become perfectly still, the way a lake goes still right before a stone breaks the surface. "Your vehicle was removed from the lot earlier this morning," the facilities manager said carefully. "Per executive request." Caleb didn't respond immediately. He stood with his tube of drawings in one hand and his thermos in the other and processed the information the way engineers process information, systematically, one variable at a time. His truck was gone. His son needed to be picked up in less than an hour. He had no other vehicle. He was standing in a building full of people who needed him far more than he needed them. "Removed," he repeated. "You mean towed?" "Yes." "Who authorized that?" No one answered. But several heads turned, slowly, involuntarily, toward the woman at the head of the table. Sloane Whitfield sat perfectly still for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the entire narrative of the morning reassembled itself in front of her with sickening clarity. The muddy truck in her parking lot. The phone call to security. The casual, instant judgment. And now, the realization that the vehicle she had deemed unworthy of her building belonged to the only person capable of saving the most important project of her career. The symbolism was not subtle. No one in the room missed it. "I authorized it," Sloane said. Her voice was level, controlled. but something behind it had cracked. I saw the vehicle this morning and made a judgment without verifying ownership. Caleb looked at her. Not with anger. Anger was a luxury he had stopped being able to afford around the same time he started doing his own laundry, his son's laundry, and the dishes all in the same 2-hour window after bedtime. "My son's booster seat is in that truck," he said quietly. "His dinosaur is in there too. He doesn't sleep without it." The sentence landed in the room like a physical object. A booster seat. A stuffed dinosaur. The small, specific details of a life being held together by one person doing everything alone. These were not abstractions, these were the things that actually mattered, and they had been hauled away on a flatbed because a woman decided a truck wasn't clean enough for her parking lot. Philip stood up immediately. "We'll get it back, right now." Within seconds the room reorganized itself around a single objective that had nothing to do with architecture. The facilities manager was on the phone with the towing company. Philip's assistant was calculating drive times. The CFO offered his own car for the school pickup if the truck couldn't be recovered in time. A junior associate was already pulling up the towing company's address on her laptop. Caleb watched all of this without expression. He had learned a long time ago that people revealed themselves most clearly in moments of disruption. Megan used to say that. She was a social worker before the diagnosis. She understood people in ways Caleb understood soil density and load-bearing ratios. He thought about her now, in this glass room full of panicking executives, and almost smiled. Sloane stood from her chair and walked toward Caleb. The distance between them was perhaps 10 feet, but it looked like the longest walk of her professional life. Every step was watched by every person in the room. "Mr. Harlan, I owe you an apology." Caleb waited. "What I did this morning was wrong. I made an assumption based on appearance and acted on it without thought. That is not the kind of leadership I believe in, and it is not who I intend to be. I am sorry." She said it looking directly at him. No hedging, no corporate buffer language, no "I'm sorry if you were offended." Just an actual apology from someone who understood, perhaps for the first time in a long time, how much damage a single, thoughtless decision could cause. Caleb studied her face for a moment. He was looking for something specific. Not perfection, not groveling, just sincerity. The genuine human recognition that another person had been harmed and that it mattered. He found enough of it. "I appreciate that," he said, "but right now, I need to get my son." The truck was located at a lot 11 blocks east of the building. The towing company, upon being informed of the situation by Whitfield's legal team, agreed to release the vehicle immediately and waive all fees. A company driver was dispatched to retrieve it while the CFO, a man named Richard Kwan who had 3 children of his own and understood the calculus of school pickup times with molecular precision, personally drove Caleb across town in his Mercedes to collect Theo. They arrived at the school at 12,027. 3 minutes to spare. Theo came running out with his backpack bouncing against his spine and a crayon drawing crumpled in one hand. He climbed into the back seat of the Mercedes and looked around with wide eyes. "Dad, whose car is this?" "A friend's," Caleb said. "It smells weird. It smells like leather." "Yeah, weird." Richard Kwan, who had paid $114,000 for this vehicle, suppressed a laugh, then laughed anyway. By the time they returned to the Whitfield building, Caleb's truck was parked directly in front of the main entrance. It had been washed, not aggressively, but enough to reveal that the paint underneath was actually a decent shade of hunter green. Someone had refueled it. The booster seat was still in place. Professor the dinosaur was sitting upright in it, buckled in, which meant someone at the towing lot had either done that intentionally, or the universe had a sense of humor. Theo spotted the dinosaur immediately, unbuckled himself and retrieved it with the urgency of someone recovering a family member from a crisis zone. Caleb stood outside the building with his son on one side and his truck on the other. The glass facade reflected both of them back, the tall man in the flannel shirt and the small boy clutching a stuffed dinosaur. For a moment, it was just the two of them, the way it had been for 14 months, the way it would continue to be, and Caleb felt the particular specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying everything alone and has just been reminded, publicly, that the world does not always make that easy. Several board members came down to say goodbye, not the formal transactional goodbye of business acquaintances. The real kind. The kind where people shake your hand with both of theirs and hold it a beat too long and look you in the eye with something that might be admiration, Or might be shame, or might be both. Philip Chen crouched down to Theo's level. That's a cool dinosaur. What his name? Professor, Theo said. He's a paleontologist. A dinosaur who studies dinosaurs? Yeah. He's doing research. Philip smiled. The kind of smile that comes from being reminded that the most important things in the world are very, very small. Sloane did not come downstairs. Caleb noticed. He did not take it as an insult. Some apologies need time to settle before the person who gave them can stand near the person who received them without feeling the weight of it all over again. 3 weeks later, Caleb signed a contract with Whitfield Architectural Group. The terms were significant, not just financially, though the money was enough to clear Megan's remaining medical debt, start a college fund for Theo, and make a payment on the truck that the mechanic described as long overdue and, frankly, kind of miraculous it's still running. The terms were significant because they included something unusual for a consulting agreement, a clause guaranteeing flexible scheduling to accommodate single-parent responsibilities. Philip Chen had insisted on it personally. Construction on the Crown Lakeshore Tower resumed 6 weeks later. Caleb's micropile solution worked exactly as projected. The city review hearing came and went without incident. The client consortium, upon reviewing the revised structural analysis, not only dropped their breach claim but extended the partnership for 2 additional projects. The story spread through the firm the way stories do in any organization, not as gossip but as parable. The consultant with the muddy truck. The CEO who had it towed. The meeting that changed everything. It became shorthand for something larger. A reminder about assumptions, about surfaces, about the difference between how a person looks and what a person knows. Sloane Whitfield never publicly discussed what happened that morning. But employees noticed changes. Small ones at first. The visitor parking policy was revised. The executive lot was open to all scheduled guests regardless of vehicle. A memo went out about inclusive, professional standards, which everyone understood was really about one specific morning and one specific truck. 6 months later, during a company-wide meeting, Sloane referenced the incident without naming names. She called it her most important leadership failure and her most important leadership lesson. She said that competence doesn't have a dress code and value doesn't have a vehicle requirement. She said she was still learning. The room was quiet after she finished. The kind of quiet that means something actually landed. Caleb wasn't there for that speech. He was at Theo's school for a parent-teacher conference. Theo was reading above grade level. He had made friends. He still had nightmares sometimes, but less often now. He still needed Professor the Dinosaur to fall asleep, but Caleb suspected that would fade eventually, and he was in no hurry. On the drive home, Theo asked why they never got a new truck. Caleb thought about it for a few seconds, the way he always thought about his son's questions, carefully, because children remember the answers to things you don't expect them to remember. Because this truck knew your mom, he said. She rode in this seat. She put her feet on that dashboard. Some things don't get better by being new, they get better by lasting. Theo considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old processing something he didn't fully understand but sensed was important. Like Professor, he said. Yeah, buddy, like Professor. The green Silverado pulled out of the school parking lot, turned right on Maple, and disappeared into a Tuesday afternoon that looked completely ordinary from the outside. Just a man and his son in an old truck driving home. No one watching would have guessed what that truck had been through. No one watching would have known what the man behind the wheel was carrying, or how close he had come, more than once, to setting it all down. But he hadn't. And every morning, when the alarm went off at 5:15, he got up, made coffee, laid out the small clothes, packed the small lunch, tied the small shoes, and drove the same truck to the same school with the same quiet determination that had kept him going since the morning he woke up alone for the first time and realized that the rest of his life was going to require a kind of courage no one gives awards for. The truck still rattled at idle, the passenger door still stuck. The windshield still had that crack running diagonally from corner to corner like a map of somewhere he had already been. But it ran. And so did he.